Good morning and welcome to our event today. We are sponsored by Intel this morning, but this is a Euractiv hybrid event, so it's lovely to see people in the room as well as so many of you joining us online from across Europe and around the world. Today's event, we're entitling it about semiconductors, a cornerstone for Europe's digital future. And when we think about that word cornerstone, it really is the foundation of everything we want to do, be it autonomous driving, being it remote medical services. Everything that the digital future promises us is built on this one very fundamental element. Now, the EU has set forward an important ambition, a very ambitious ambition to produce around 20% of the world's cutting-edge semiconductors by 2030. And that's a big leap. That's a 9% leap from where we are today. So we're going to talk this morning about how we get there, how do we achieve that, how to become this world leader. There is a current chip shortage around the world, which we're all very aware of. It's having knock-on effects in supply chains everywhere. So this is an extremely timely debate, and I'm delighted to say that this morning I have got a great panel of experts with me to discuss that. We are going to have a presentation on research. So Global Management Consultancy Kearney has produced a report sponsored by Intel on the future demand of these leading edge semiconductors. We're going to hear from them about what we can expect. It's a cutting edge, very leading edge report. It was only just produced. You may not have had a chance to read it yet, but we're going to get into the detail of some of that. And of course, we will be sharing with you the links and where you can go and read more throughout this morning's discussion. As always, on Euractiv events, we encourage interaction with you, the audience. So please do write down your questions to our speakers. Please try and be concise because we've short of time, as always, but we will try to get as many as possible. So just try and put those in there in the conversation and direct them to whichever speaker you want to answer them. If it's for the whole panel, please do indicate that as well. And I've got various devices here with me, all powered by semiconductors that I'm going to be using to try and keep on top of what you want to ask. Of course, we have people in the audience as well. Feel free to raise your hand in the old-fashioned way, and I will bring in questions. If we can, you can use your tablets as well, because I know that you all have those on you as well. With that, I'm going to hand over the floor to a welcome remark from Greg Slater, who's the Vice President of Intel, to tell us a bit more about why this study was commissioned, and then we'll go straight into a presentation of the study itself. So over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I'm glad to be here, and our company's been in the semiconductor industry for more than 50 years. We have a manufacturing presence in Ireland and a strong supply chain on the continental Europe. Every government in the world is trying to figure out how to attract more of the supply chain to their jurisdiction, and the reasons are simple. The chip shortage, there's technology leadership reasons, because semiconductors are the foundational blocks of all emerging technologies. And so we commissioned this report to inform policymakers on the value of leading-edge semiconductor manufacturing. Again, we manufacture here in Europe. We want to do more, and we think it's really part of the critical ecosystem that we need here. And as you'll hear today, the manufacturing has spin-off benefits, has innovation benefits, and it can strengthen the entire ecosystem. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Kearney.
Gentlemen, you have the floor. Please introduce yourselves, present your report. We're actually here more than anything to listen to you.
We first start with introducing ourselves.
Go
that
ahead.
Might be nice. Would you agree, Jennifer? Good morning. We are also very happy to be here. My name is Johan Aurik. I'm a partner and chairman emeritus of AT Kearney, and together with Guido and a large team of consultants had the pleasure in the last months to study this topic, this fascinating topic, and to produce this report. Guido?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Johan. I'm a colleague of Johan from the Munich office from Kearney, and happy to be here and walk you through a few of the highlights of the study. For more details, please look or take a read in the study. I would just take a few snapshots, and happy to pick up in the discussion other facets of our study. So the study was conducted in the last months based upon market reports, our proprietary kind of knowledge, as well as also selected set of interviews. And I just quickly want to walk you through key findings here. So as Jennifer mentioned, digitalization is everywhere in Europe. We see it, especially in the pandemic, we have seen it, that we're using digital devices in everyday's life. And what we see also, if we look at Europe, and we maybe can show the first slide. Next one. Yes. So if we look at the consumption of semiconductors in Europe. So this means how semiconductors are being used in various applications, be it in telecommunication, be it in automotive, but be it also mobile phones. The consumption will double in the coming 10 years. So there will be a healthy growth and there will be more use of semiconductors. But I think which is more important is that if we look at the usage of these semiconductors in Europe, a certain segment of this industry is growing at a much higher pace, at 15% pace, and that's the so-called leading edge semiconductors. So semiconductors which have very, very fine structures, so below 10 nanometers, and the main growth behind it will be topics like artificial intelligence, high performance computing, communication, 5G, 6G, but also other industries which are not using it so much will pick up over the time. For instance, automotive, just one example is autonomous driving, which will drive this. So there's a lot of usage of these chips in the coming years, and Europe depends upon it because it's not just that we put these chips into our products, but we also use them in a lot of critical applications, and if they wouldn't be there, these applications would not run. On the other hand, Jennifer already mentioned it. If we go to the next slide, please. And maybe we jump the next one. Jennifer mentioned that the capacity, for instance, in semiconductors went down, and there's an ambition to increase it. If we look at this so-called leading edge semiconductor technology, so again, the small bar in the first slide with the very, very small feature sizes, so below 10 nanometers. Here, the capacity, if we can go one back, please. Here the capacity changed over time from Europe, which had a good position in the two decades ago, to basically zero or a moderate position. And the forecast, and this is a steady state forecast, meaning we're projecting the current situation into the future, it will say zero in 2030 if we're not acting on the capacity side. So what to do? And maybe next slide, please. Next one. So what we recommend is to strengthen the ecosystem of the leading edge semiconductor system. So Europe has already several strong pillars in this ecosystem. For instance, we have great research here in Belgium with IMAC. We have great suppliers which have a leading position in selected segments. We also have a lot of talent. And here we say, first of all, we need to further broaden it and also strengthen the system. For instance, on the talent side, we can see that in the study also, we have a great foundation around senior graduates as well as PhD. We're leading here as a region in Europe. If we can more bring this also towards the semiconductor industry, that would be a great foundation and will create a lot of innovation. The two areas where we would say we would stronger build our foundation in Europe, that's first of all design of leading edge semiconductors, as well as also manufacturing of leading edge semiconductors. So having also manufacturing in Europe. And if you look at other industries, where was Europe really strong? When it combined design, engineering, and manufacturing. And an example which is quite current, just look at vaccines, where we have a combination of both, which brings a lot of advantages. And if we want to strengthen this, it's not just about building it up, it will create this innovation. So we're also at the forefront of the next cycle, but it will also create a lot of economic benefits. And just a snapshot here, maybe on the next page, please. If we would look at a 10-year horizon of a 5 nanometer megafab, this is a simulation, or it's a model for foundry capacity. I know this is it's a very high investment. We're talking about 17 to 18 billion euros to invest into it, but it will pay back from a GDP perspective with around about 80 billion over a 10-year horizon, as well as also the employment. We have around about 3,000 people in the fab, but there's a lot of effects within the value chain and also the ecosystem behind. So there's benefits coming from these investments if we would strengthen the ecosystem of leading edge semiconductors. On the other hand side, we have to really also see all parameters which are needed to be successful here in Europe. I mentioned one topic is talent. There are other things like a very good infrastructure. Typical topics you look at if you're making a decision where to locate yourself globally. But there's also one topic is the cost structure. And we modeled here for a 5 nanometer fab the different cost structures between regions, for instance, in Europe as well as also East Asia. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The different cost structures. And you see there are cost differences if you look at the CapEx as well as also the OpEx of a fab of this 10 years. It's a hypothetical fab. It's something which is modeled for this typical node here. And there's a difference in incentives. So how much governments are incentivizing companies going into the region as well as into the industry. And to have a level playing ground again, we also need to consider here as Europe how to react. To also attract key companies coming to Europe. And now how to do it, as you know, if we maybe go one step back, there are 3 companies currently in the world, TSMC, Samsung and Intel, who have the capability of leading edge technology. If Europe would do it by itself, we believe that it would take longer. Would even need more investments as well as also associate with certain risks. So we also say if we strengthen the system, we have to partner globally, which is anyway given in this industry, to also then make it happen on the manufacturing side, but also on the design side. So we recommend here, first of all, to strengthen the ecosystem, to develop these pillars in Europe, but also to partner with strategic partners here as Europe. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. You skipped through so many slides there, so I know there is a depth behind what you've just presented that goes a lot more into the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about. But I'm going to introduce our panel because I do want to get your initial reactions to what you've just heard. I know you've had a brief chance to perhaps read some of the detail, but there's a lot more to delve into. I think it would be unreasonable to expect everyone to have found the depth of this study within just a few minutes. So let me introduce you. We have joining us online, we have Sigrid Johansen, who's a special advisor for economic resilience in the Dutch government. Sigrid, lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Jo de Boek is the executive vice president and chief strategy officer at IMEC, one of the leading organizations that we heard them mentioned here, but based here in Belgium, joining us also online. And Lies Veur is the Director General of ETNO, so needs no introduction in the Brussels area. Greg, you are also staying with us. You're going to give us some thoughts. Sigrid, let me start with you. You heard this overview of the study. Give me your initial reactions to what you've heard. Surprised or more that you've had your ideas confirmed? I'm really interested to hear.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on the panel. It's a very interesting report and a very good report, I think, as well. It goes in depth in many of the issues which are relevant on this matter. Do we want to make this big step towards leading edge semiconductor design, engineering, manufacturing, and maybe also application? I'll come to that later. It's an important moment, but it's not new. In 2007, when I was manager high-tech systems and talked to a lot of companies and governments in Europe, this was one of the topics as well. At that time, I think it would have cost us 10 billion. which is a considerable different amount than at the present time. I met the topic again in 2014 in the Commission when we discussed the Airbus of chips. And now again, and it's a new momentum, I think. Considering the geopolitical tensions, that makes us rethink our value chains, the importance of chips, our dependency, the vulnerability, but also makes us look at the future of Europe, I think, and it's very important also considering our strength in this area. The chip shortage is also, was mentioned before, a very important topic to rethink our future, to rethink our semiconductor ecosystem. And I think we also see an exponential growth of the semiconductor industry. And there are lots of new opportunities lying ahead. And how will Europe capture this moment? I also think it's important, if we talk about chip shortage, to really look what the causes are, because sometimes I see that things are being combined and we draw conclusions, and maybe we do not always have the right problem analysis. The causes can be from snowstorms in Texas to fires in Japan to COVID. To unilateral measures by governments. So it's a whole framework of different causes that we should look at about which chips does this concern and how can we resolve this. I think we should also look at the broader sector. When you talk about leading edge, and if we see what are the European strengths, we have several things that I think make Europe quite unique. I CEO the book, so I think of IMEC as a world-leading research institute in this area. We of course have ASML, which is a very, very important company globally. We also see that Europe has a strong semiconductor sector, which also has its challenges, but it's part of our ecosystem, so we should incorporate this in our vision. And what I'm trying to say that although the report focuses on a certain sector and also addresses the broader picture, if we develop in Europe our new vision on the future of semicon, we should do it from a holistic approach. So not maybe only combine design, engineering, manufacturing, but especially also the application side, because where will the market be? I think it was also mentioned in the report that building such a facility in Europe might be 30 to 50% more expensive than elsewhere, which will translate itself in the costs of chips. So how can you stay competitive? And having your own market in this sector is extremely important. If I look at Asia, where there is, I think, a increasingly growing market also in the US, because it's a data-driven industry. Europe has, let's say, has still to grasp this opportunity of becoming more data-driven. And from that point of view, you'll also get more of a market in which this capacity will land. From a government point of view, of course, we have the concern that ending up in a subsidy war. No one will benefit from this. So how can we keep the level playing field and at the same time promote innovation and competition? So it's a balance. From the Dutch government, we're trying to take all these different aspects into account. And my main message is that the whole ecosystem, the whole semicon ecosystem is important. It should be part of the decision, it should be part of the future of Europe. I'd like to leave it at that.
Thank you very much indeed, Sigrid. And I too remember the Airbus of chips slogan, which was perhaps laudable in ambition, but a little bit of a hot air slogan rather than something that actually delivered. Jo, and the book, you've been name checked several times already this morning. We're really keen to get your reaction to the brief report on the study, but also, the detail of the study itself.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks for being invited on this panel. Interesting references being made. So IMEC indeed is part of this ecosystem. I'm proud to be part of this ecosystem. A few things in the report do resonate. And of course, it, as you said, requires deeper study. But there are a few things that clearly also speak to our DNA. And I'd like to just mention here. And it's been mentioned a few times, is the ecosystem. This is about, first of all, global partnership, but also being locally present in an ecosystem. It's an ambition that we've had as IMEC since our very, very beginning, 38 years ago, and then Europe's presence in that digital future, in that ecosystem, I think is the key ambition to which we are speaking here. So shorter term, medium term, but specifically long term, there's going to be the need for advanced semiconductors. And that is actually very well represented in the study here as well, where you see this curve of the growth in the coming decade and decades to come. And not just because of the sheer need of compute, because of the applications requiring it. And I'll come back to that in a second. So I think in ecosystem and ecosystem innovation, Europe does have players, we as IMEC, but also other RTOs. And I think the European industry as general has played very well in this ecosystem globally. We believe that, and then I want to come to an important element in the ecosystem is the connection in between the different partners. You can call it supply chain, but it's also an innovation chain, if you want. So we strongly believe in connecting to, for instance, the suppliers, and ASML was mentioned by Sigrid for very, very good reasons, evidently. IMEC has had a 30-plus year experience and relationship in how to try to provide value to players like ASML, but others as well, and making sure that the suppliers find a hub to innovate and to innovate at an industrial scale. So when we say research, we really see it through the eyes of the industry. And that is, I think, a very important element, complementing the breakthrough innovation that you also need, but making sure it becomes a real innovation in the market. So suppliers are important for Europe, and I think it's wise to mention them here. They're mentioned in the report. I grant that, but I think it's important to really stress it once more. And then, of course, it's important to also have, and we mentioned skills, and skills is one thing, but skills bring knowledge, and they sort of, amplify knowledge when you can bring them to bear. Skills is very important. It brings European IP in those elements of the future, the digital future that will require European presence. So I think Europe has done well, and again, also that is mentioned in the study, done well in the R&D and bringing that research to bear. It's now time to make sure that we harvest on that also in Europe, and that's something that you can only do when you continue to invest in that bridging between the breakthrough and the market needs. And that brings me to the third part where I think ecosystems are important. And again, it's going to be a bit repetitive. I'm sure Sigrid mentioned it already. It is understanding where the chips go into. Of course, we can say it's compute, and we have had happy scaling decades in the past, where we know, whatever we did to make the transistor smaller, there's going to be use for this. And this is going to continuously be true, of course, because you save a lot of energy when you go to the smaller nodes. You can do a lot of more functionality in smaller places. But also, you will combine this with applications in the digital arena that are demanded by and needed for the applications that are very important for Europe, or globally speaking even. And so that connection is very important. And I do applaud the study really doubling down on that combination of the application, mentioning a couple of very important markets, as was mentioned already in the opening statements, of course, automotive, health, but also, the digital future of our energy system, etc. All of that will need a combination of not just the leading edge nodes, but also advanced functionality leading to that. And then finally, I'm sure we'll come back to some of these elements in the ecosystem, but I think we strongly believe, and I want to just emphasize that point again, in a global partnership. I mean, there's no such thing as having a full ecosystem on an island. This is going to be, or a continent for that matter, it's going to be a global partnership. And let's find ways to connect to our partners transatlantic, within Europe, places that we find are in the same spirit of making the digital future a global arena. So I'd like to end here for now and be more than happy to come back on other comments.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I am sure there will be plenty of questions for you. A reminder to our audience to put those in the discussion on the chat. And here in the room, you've all got phones. By all means, please put your questions to us as well. Lise, it's lovely to see you back in person again. It feels like it's been a long time. Give me the ethno perspective and explain why ethno is so involved in this and your reaction to the study.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for inviting ethno to this panel. Ethno represents the leading telcos in Europe, so that's Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, etc. But we also have observers from the value chain like Nokia, Ericsson, and also Qualcomm. So I will bring the telecom viewpoint, and I have 3 key messages for today. I had very short time to read the report, but I think it's very timely and useful and much needed. So first point, from a telecom perspective, our industry is an important part of the semiconductor industry too. We have technological developments like cloud computing, Internet of Things, 5G and 6G is increasingly, also as mentioned in the report, demanding high performance computing. Also ubiquitous broadband communication, all is needing semiconductors. And also recently my colleagues in the US Association, US Telecom, they have published a report on semiconductors showing that the pandemic with remote working, remote education was a major drive of further semiconductor demand also in the US. So there is a demand all over the world. Our second point is that the issue described in the Kearney report is similar to the one that we very well know in the telecom sector, because with semiconductors, Europe faces a great opportunity, as also mentioned in the report. We have a growth market, we have a strategic one, we have the skills, and it has a societal and also economic benefit. But this is also what happens to the new generation of connectivity seen from a telco side. So I believe the big question here for Europe is, how do we keep that value that we create, and how do we keep it in Europe, and how do we make it useful for the European economy? And there, I think the investments of Intel in Europe are much needed, and this should be good news for the capitals. A third and last point, also on the side of the solutions, I see similarities with what is happening in 5G, but also in digital services in the telecom sector, because we believe that industrial policy is the best tool to work, to tackle these historical challenges that we're facing right now in the transition to new telecom networks, but also to stronger Europe in semiconductor industry. So I do welcome the work that the European Commission is doing on this, especially with Commissioner Breton, but talking about industrial policy, first and foremost, we need to allow and encourage collaboration among industrial players in those areas where it's necessary to build global leadership. So that's important. And also, of course, scale. Second, industrial policy also means that we need a strong public and private collaboration, as pointed out in the report. And there, I think we need to have policymakers see themselves as not only regulators, but facilitators. And the facilitator element is key here. Finally, industrial policy means to take an ecosystem view. I think all of us have mentioned it so far. And this is essential both for industrial leadership and from an innovation angle. So we need to look at the full value chain to innovate and involve all actors.
Thank you very much, Lise. I knew you said, I welcome what the Commission is doing. I knew there was going to be a but when it comes into that. But thank you very much. Gentlemen, Johan Guid, I don't know which of you wants to respond to it, but our three speakers have pretty much sort of agreed with a lot of what you found, but they're suggesting different solutions to, for example, the current problem and projecting a future. How do you see the future panning out? Would you like to?
Well, first of all, thank you for the previous speakers. Everyone strongly made the point that you have to take an ecosystem point of view, and we couldn't agree more. The ecosystem is global, is highly complex. It is absolutely true that Europe has many areas of strength, so it's absolutely feasible, we believe, for Europe to catch up. And I believe Sigrid mentioned, compared it to 2007, I think you mentioned as the date. You are absolutely right. A lot of these trends were already noted several years ago. But what has happened in the meantime, particularly in design and manufacturing for leading edge, Europe has, we also need to recognize that, not done enough. So there are gaps there. We believe that gap can be bridged. And we point out in the report the ways to do that. But there's one word that I would like to underline, and that you see that in the title of the report, that is the word urgent. It takes years after approval, 3, 4, 5 years, to build a leading edge manufacturing facility, a mega fab, so to speak. The clock is ticking. We cannot afford another 10 years of debate and of nice words. It is really important that both governments and industry combined, and not only European industry but global industry, partners too, that actions is taken and that investments are being made. Otherwise, we will be sitting here in 10 years from now having the same debate, and that would really be a shame.
Well, thank you. I see we actually already have 1 or 2 questions coming in from our audience. I'm going to let those build up before I come to them. But Sigrid, I'm going to ask you all for a little bit of a doomsday scenario. What is the worst case scenario? We heard the word urgency here, and this is not new, Sigrid, as you pointed out. We've been talking about a supposed Airbus for chips for a long, long time. What's the worst case scenario if there is a failure to act?
Well, you can develop many worst case scenarios who can eventually end up in Hollywood films. That's more me to think of the opportunity. As I mentioned, it is an important momentum to make the right decision. Also in the book, in the report, it was mentioned 2 things. It was, I think, Philips who started TSMC as one of the founders with Taiwanese subsidies. Then I think, what a momentum was that. And it was also Philips that had 80% of the global chips market for smartphones. Then you see the history of technology passing, and you think, which momentum should we take now? But consider it carefully, not jump into a big adventure, but really look, and I think all my colleagues in the panel have emphasized that, what are the strengths of our ecosystem, and what do we need additional, how it would also reflect on the growing economy of Europe. And that's a very important topic, that as many as possible people benefit from this. That can mean in healthcare applications or other applications. It can mean in jobs. It can mean in better education. And so how will this translate into society and economy? And from, let's say, also a more geopolitical point of view, if you can manage a stable situation in this sector, where there is trust in the future, where there is clarity, I think that will be tremendously important. Also work with partners and allies, but also work with all the other countries to whom semicon is important. So you can discuss this from many different angles, geopolitically, economically, societal. It's an important momentum, but take the broad picture and emphasize what is so good about the European ecosystem. What do you need additionally, and where will the benefits land?
Yo, the same question to you. I know we want to try and focus on the opportunities and the positives, but as we start this discussion, let's look at what the downside could be.
Yeah, indeed. So it's a moral duty to be optimist in a technology sector like this, but indeed there is a real doomsday. I think that can happen is that you lose your strengths, right? I mean, I think, and we've heard a few examples of that in where we might have had an historic opportunity, or were on top of it and lost it. I think one of the worst things to happen is that you lose current strengths that you have, and that then immediately turn this positive. The opportunity there is to build on them, right? So Europe does have strengths. It is mentioned in the program or in the report. Building on those strengths is the first thing to do, and that's where typically also the most easy investments are. The return on investments are clear. But it also means we have to be very vigilant, right? One of the strengths automotive industry, well, the way a car is built has changed. The car builders are different today, in a sense that who's bringing the future car to market is a game that's really fully open. And so I think strengths there are important. And it's mentioned that we do have the know-how of building these complex systems in Europe, like cars is of course one of those, and that is a strength. And if you connect that then to where the digital future in those applications is, you can build a plan towards these very advanced manufacturing also in Europe. And I think that's where the scenario, and I'm leaving out the doomsday part here. The scenario is to be that we building on those strengths, continuing to double down on that, because there is a market for those strengths today. And then stepping and then leaping, I would say stepping is maybe too passive. Leaping to that digital future and building on the momentum that there is with serious investments indeed. So we saw the curve of incentives, or the graphs of incentives. That's one player. There is legislation maybe that can come in. There is for sure also the attractiveness of Europe that needs to be amplified outside, so that we can get talent in, we can get VC money in, because I think startups and ventures are a very important element in getting to that leapfrogging scenario. And then building a technology and innovation leadership in this. And I was happy to hear that in the EU Chips Act pre-announcement that there was a clear statement on technology and innovation leadership ambition and a program to support that. So I think stepping away from the doomsday scenario into a future scenario, those are a few elements I think which are really critical success factors that we have in hand. And so in that sense, a bit of an historic debate.
Well, thank you very much. Lise, no surprise, same question to you.
The obvious one is, of course, the risk of losing digital leadership. But from a telco point of view, I think what will be important for us in the future is a lot about the edge computing, the edge cloud, and not having the innovation hubs, the spin-off ecosystems here in Europe risk slowing that process down for the telco. So I think for us, it's important we have an industry, an ecosystem in Europe that is innovative, because we're looking into a future where we would like to move. We have 5G, we have 6G. Edge cloud will be extremely important, and if we can build that in to ecosystems with the semiconductor industries, I think that would be extremely important.
Let me add you into this conversation now as well, with the same question. I mean, we've heard different perspectives of everyone trying to be optimistic, but I will start with being a little bit pessimistic. We are in a current chip shortage, and this is something that was not necessarily foreseen by the wider ecosystem. Did you see this potentially being an issue? And what is the worst case scenario if it's not addressed?
Well, so whether it's geopolitical concerns or natural disasters, if you don't have manufacturing, then you're reliant on a supply that comes from a very small part of the world. And if you can't get that supply, we've already seen what's happened in the auto industry, but the shortage is much broader than that. So there's that issue. There's the ability to supply your industries with fundamental semiconductors that run telcos, that run the digital economy. But there's also the technology leadership aspect. And as the Kearney report points out, the two areas that have the most value add are design and manufacturing. And when you lose one, you impair the other. If you have both, they create synergistic effects. And so in terms of technology leadership, you also want the most critical parts of the supply chain here on the continent. You can't have the whole supply chain necessarily in a very robust manner, but you can pick the most critical elements for technology leadership.
Well, I think that's become quite quite clear because of the current pandemic. Our buzzword, if you like, in Brussels used to be sustainability, and now it's resilience, and that's about supply chain resilience. So let me ask, we've talked about various different sorts of shortages, and I hear all of you speakers saying it's the geopolitical situation. I'm gonna come to you and ask you to drill down into that a little bit, and be clear about what we mean by that and what Europe can actually do to offset these sorts of concerns, issues.
I'm going to stay on the place I know best, which is technology. So I'm not going to make any political statements in this particular regard. So one thing I can say from at least our history is that geopolitics hasn't played as much as it plays today, which is a very easy statement to make. We've always seen that global partnerships have flourished. We have partly enabled that, we believe. We have also seen success factors coming our way when we do this. And I think that the mistakes we shouldn't make is indeed to let the very important elements of that global partnership drift apart too far. And what I mean by that is, and I refer to what Greg just said, is that the high value elements which are in that ecosystem, you always need to have either control or access to, which is whatever is easiest to get, or a very strong partnership. And what I mean to say is, if you're too distant from advanced technology and you may still have the design, you may not have the real connect to the future if that distance is too big. And let me clarify that. If you want to create a demand, and you know that the demand is or the applications that will create the demand are in need of a digital functionality, but you're a bit too far out on knowing what exactly can be done, how the new technology will influence your application, how you will maybe be Schumpetered if somebody else comes by and understood before you did what that new technology can offer, then you're lost. And I think a very important element, and that's why geopolitics should be dealt with, I think, is to make sure that partners in the geopolitical scene understand that it's important for all of us to have a good connect between the high value add elements of the ecosystem. And so therefore we truly believe, and we see it happen all the time in our global partnership as we have it here, is that companies that stepped away from the manufacturing side are eager to find out what is going to come next. And of course, they then need also, when they understand what's coming next, they will need access to manufacturing. But first, you'll need access to the insights, to the exploration, to validate and demonstrate in sort of pilot facilities or access to early demonstrations of technology, to explore that and to understand what it would mean for your own products or services, but also for that of your customers and the customers of your customers. So that is very clearly, I think, the key element on which the partnership discussion should focus. The high value add elements in the ecosystem, do we jointly have a good view on how we partake in those and how we share them and how we can actually build a level playing field on that. If that's not clear, I'm willing to amplify it, but I think that's a very important element.
Well, I'm going to come to Sigrid, and obviously you're in a different position than you and our other panelists. I'm not asking you to make a political statement, but do tell me a bit more about where you see this geopolitical problem and where the nexus of that is.
I think what we all see is that from a very successful globalism, what do you call it? If you look at the success of the present semiconductor industry, a large part of that success is globalism. The ability to look everywhere for the best conditions, the best partners, and the best cost effectiveness. And that has developed a very sensitive system and a very broad spread globally of the value chain. The longer the value chain is and the more spread it is, it also makes us vulnerable for all sorts of possible events or actions. At a time where we all know that technology is being used more and more as an instrument, can be done by countries or by other people who don't mean too well. So decreasing this vulnerability in such a sensitive supply chain for us, I think, is something to be considered. At the same time, we have very strong partners globally, and if I look at what Jo of IMEC said, these partnerships should be strengthened to see where we can work together, where we can maintain and build on this leadership, how can we decrease the vulnerabilities, but also make sure you create a stable situation. I think over the last 4 years, so many actions have been taken that I think the sector should be more be able to rely on what policy actions are, and not so much unilateral, but preferably if we want to do something, agree multilateral on certain actions. Tech leadership is important. We're talking a lot here about advanced semicon. We should also take into account how important the mature semicon sector is. If it's about chip shortages, at the moment it's mainly also looking at Infineon, NXP, ST Microelectronics and others, and Bosch. They are very important for our European ecosystem as well. So we have to do both, look at our mature ecosystem and look at the advanced ecosystem, and also where they can join forces and become stronger together. It's not one or the other, I think it's and. I also think that by creating these global partnerships and creating a more interdependency, you also are more aware of each other's position and the need that you need each other. I think what you want to avoid, if every continent has its own value chain, that in the end you become each other's competitors, and then you end up in the well-known subsidy wars, etc. So where can you work together, build trust, build this leadership together, but also taking into account the importance of our mature industry, which is now investing a lot in Europe. If I look at the recent investments by Bosch, by Infineon, I hope there's going to be more. If Intel is interested in investing in Europe, I'm sure we welcome that. Geopolitically, a lot of things are happening, building on our own strength, and I can only repeat that, and taking the whole ecosystem into account is very important.
Thank you, Sigrid. I'm struck by what you say is that this competitive nature and the need to collaborate in so many events, not just in the tech sector. We talk about, is Europe leading? Europe must do better than Asia and America and the global south. That does create this rather competitive background to these events. Lise, how do you view it? I see you taking a lot of notes there. You're nodding away with a lot of what Sigrid was saying.
No, but Sigrid was talking about the value chain, and the longer it gets, the more vulnerable it gets. And I completely agree on this, but I also see there is a need not to have a longer value chain. We see that we need to work much more with the different parties in the value chain, both with our vendors, but also with the end users. So I think the value chain by design right now is growing, and we cannot stop that. So for me, it's important we look into a strong Europe that, of course, has an ecosystem that can help us create and innovate and be resilient. But we still need the global partnerships here. So I think we cannot turn time back and say we're not global, but we need to be smart in how we do our partnerships, and also to realize that the value chain has changed. So it's not black and white. It's much more collaboration than it was 5-10 years ago.
Gentlemen, I'm putting joint questions to you, Johan and Guido, because I'm interested to know, what does the report, what does your study have to say about this?
Go ahead.
So I think I can now re-emphasize a lot of things which the panelists said here. So we're also advocating strongly to strengthen the ecosystem, also always having a global view here, and also partnering, but also somewhere take the advantages, as also a few of the colleagues mentioned, is in the moment where you are close and combine things, a lot of innovation comes out. And I just want to somewhere re-emphasize now, independent of semiconductors, Europe was always good when it somewhere combined manufacturing and engineering. We see that in a lot of industries. So it doesn't mean that, and these industries are also partnering globally. Nevertheless, I think they have also kind of a strong, at least foundation here in Europe. And that's something, and I don't want to now reiterate these thoughts, but I would agree with those thoughts.
Craig, I have a question coming in from an audience from Julian Deutsch, asking for specifically you to answer. The EU is pushing for more semiconductor production in Europe, but is the EU investing too little money? And is the EU's CHIPS Act coming too late?
Well, on a
It's a rather leading question from a journalist, of course.
On a second question, it depends on how fast they implement the EU CHIPS Act. And they can learn from the US CHIPS Act and how that's going, the challenges that has faced. Is the EU investing too little? Well, the EU could always invest more. It hasn't really invested yet in leading edge semiconductors. So it has plans to do that. It has a goal, a stretch. The 20%, as you mentioned, is a stretch goal. It's a good goal. The U.S. has a goal also, and both need advanced semiconductor manufacturing. So I think as Kearney mentioned, the clock is ticking. It takes 3 to 5 years to get a fab up and running, and so in that sense, you can't delay a whole lot longer, because that share that they showed, that share of manufacturing will continue to decrease over time. And then at some point, it becomes harder to reverse, right? So now's the time to reverse it.
I have a couple of questions here on partnerships. Ben Bosman is wondering whether the speakers think that geopolitics and politicians in general are creating obstacles. I'm sure we all would say that's the case of what they do, but in the way of ensuring the smooth delivery of semiconductors, or more generally, technology. Should there be a more technocratic approach towards partnerships? Julian Gray also asked earlier, specifically to you, Yo, you had mentioned the nature of the ecosystem and the importance of global partnerships, and he's asking you to comment on how geopolitics might shape these partnerships, particularly with regard to China, which is also prioritizing and building up its own leading edge semiconductors through subsidies. Yo, I'm going to ask you to comment. As I say, several questions. We can't deal with all of them in one go, but talk to me about partnerships and about, for example, even public-private partnerships and the nature of how those work.
Okay. Do you have an hour? I think it's a very involved topic indeed. And so partnership in general, and I heard the word technocratic in bringing that in the different discussions is, I think, from our point of view, very important. So you need to talk about technology in a sense, but partnerships go way beyond that. And maybe I want to expand just a little on, or step back even. We talk about the ecosystem of the semiconductors, which of course is very important and foremost our discussion item. But then again, let's think about partnerships between the telco and the automotive, right? I mean, there's not going to be a car that's not connected. There's not going to be anything happening basically in the industry which is not going to be connected maybe throughout the global chain of certain concern. So all of these applications, actually, all of these markets are going to be connected. Health is not disconnected from telecom again, is not disconnected from your work and life and all of the data that you pick up there. And I mentioned, I saw in the report pharmacy or pharmaceutical companies were even mentioned. I was like, what is the connect? Well, they built on HPC, they built on understanding their future molecules, they built on understanding how to make, for instance, cell therapies become more efficient through nanotechnology and through the most advanced semiconductor behind that. So I think that is one thing to look at partnership, to not focus only, though important, not only on the technology per se, but first of all, make sure that we globally understand, and of course then also in Europe, where we can make a difference between, better said, by connecting the applications together. So I think that's where Europe has been traditionally strong, but that's also where other continents are really building up, not only the manufacturing of chips per se, but understanding where that connect of the applications go to. And sorry, I think that was an important thing a bit outside, maybe tangential to the discussion, but coming back to the question how public-private partnerships can help. Well, I think we can point to the US and see the importance of procurement and very strong leadership in fueling the R&D and fueling the prototyping. What it led to, for what we currently hold in our hands in terms of communication, a lot of that has, of course, been fueled by government programs. So that is true for, of course, Europe as well. We have strong programs in connecting players in the innovation system. We have, in our particular context, Excel, transforming in KDT, key digital technologies. Important. But then again, on top of that, you need to have that infrastructure on which it can land. And I think that's where public-private partnerships, and I truly believe the CHIPS Act now is bringing that momentum where we can build pan-European collaboration to connect not only the technologies, but also those applications, as I earlier mentioned, on those platforms. That's where I believe these partnerships could be pre-competitive. Which is one of the key words that we hold very sacred here in our place. We want to make sure that companies that maybe fiercely fight for the market out there see the hurdles and we tackle them together as much as we can. And lithography is one of those key examples of where we all benefit from making the solutions happen. So that is, I think, an important element of sort of pan-European investment in bringing the innovation through pilots, through demonstration, through leadership investments into the market quickly. I hope this only remotely answers part of that question.
No problem. Thank you, Yo. Lise, I want to get your perspective on public-private partnerships. You represent a lot of different private companies, but they often work with governments hand in glove.
Let me just say, I agree with you that connectivity is the foundation of much of what we're talking about here in Europe. So connected cars, health, etc. And 5G and 6G is going to actually, in my opinion, revolutionize how we live as citizens in Europe. But and partnerships, we have seen partnerships on, for example, the connected cars. The Commission pushed us. We are now strongly collaborating with the car industry on this. And I think it's extremely important we have this overall broad EU level partnerships. But I also see a lot of partnerships out in the member states between the operators and much more the industries, not as much the public-private partnership, but more private-private partnerships, and thinking how can we elevate Europe into the next generation on connectivity. And my point here is I think the Commission would benefit from moving away of thinking in silos. It's very much did you connect, or it's where everything is happening. Instead, it needs to be unfolded into a broader, more horizontal collaboration. So I would pledge for us to go into a new world where we take the whole value chain also when we talk about semiconductors, because we see the effects of if we have a shortage, that's going to harm all of us, all industries, everything, all the citizens. So we need to see this as a horizontal issue and not only as a digital issue.
Well, you've picked up on a lot of questions that are coming in from our audience quite rapidly. Greg, I mean, we've got a question here on from Antonio. Would like to hear some thoughts from the panel on how the EU can, in practice, balance between autonomy and cooperation on semiconductors. I think we've addressed a lot of that, but in terms of public-private partnerships across borders, so inside and outside the EU, how do you see that working?
Well, a good example of that would be IMEC partnering with the National Semiconductor Technology Center that the U.S. CHIPS Act is setting up. Rather than being competitors, they would find a way to partner together to raise, as has been said, to get into the next level of technology and to move things forward. So the TCC is another example of the possibility of partnering on the supply chain security. So there are multiple opportunities. I think that the need to see everything horizontally and not in silos, and where are the gaps, and where can allies and natural partners collaborate to fill those gaps. Nobody can do this alone. It's too complex. But on the other hand, you do need a certain amount of autonomy in the key areas because of the geopolitical concerns, because of the concentration of manufacturing and so forth. So you have, as you say, you have to, how do you achieve that balance? It is tricky, and we're trying to figure it out as well. But that's why we're here in Europe, right? That's why we want to invest more in Europe and leverage the strengths that are here and combine them with our strengths.
Sigrid, I have a question for you from Christophe. It's very specific. It's asking, where do you see potential applications for advanced chips in European industry? I'm sure half the panel here would say everywhere, but I'd like to hear your response.
Well, when Jo was explaining the public-private partnerships, I remember that I once visited IMEC, and the researchers there explained all these possibilities from healthcare to cybersecurity to automotive. And then you come out of the building, you step back into the forest, and you think, wow, is this all possible? I think because of semiconductors, but also because we're more and more advanced on things like AI and how to work with data, we have endless opportunities. And I think if there's one challenge within Europe, to use this excellent research base that we have, to use the flagships, to use the different IPCEI projects. If the world needs to be more connected, if the European Commission even needs to be more connected, then it's definitely that industry should be maybe even more aware, and especially in Europe, also be willing to take more risks. I spent 5 years in the US, saw the most interesting applications and people there with the opportunity and the possibility to fail, but thinking of broader concepts, thinking of bigger opportunities. And being back in Europe, I think, although we have many advantages, we prefer to play things on the safe side. And I'm afraid this is an era where playing on the safe side will not help you anymore. So try to be bold. Maybe the Commission should develop these bold pilot lines to create new markets, to create a demand side where industry can fail. We need to experiment a lot more. I also used to work for the Dutch startup scene, set up the first startup program. you can see that there is an appetite for that. And I think relating to the report, it also signaled that new semiconductor companies in the US that's starting again. The US is investing in it. In Europe, that's only coming bit by bit. And this is really the moment to rethink what are the chips of the future? What are the applications of the future? So that should almost be one of the, I don't know if the European Commission wants to talk about the great projects, but that should be one of them, I think.
Liz.
Got inspired by the mention of the EU-US Tech and Trade Council, which I think is a very good initiative, but it's still, to me, one of the examples of how we have sometimes too closed environments, and we should broaden it a bit. It's a very governmental council. I would like it to be more open, and also what I think is important is we include more stakeholders. So academia is one thing there where I think if we can actually benefit from some of the skills we show that is shown in this report and bring it into to play with the industry, I think that will help also on the semiconductor front, that we have a closer collaboration between the universities, the science, the less commercial parts of Europe. So for me, I'm a member myself of a Danish technology think tank, which is based on academia, and I don't see a lot of commercial interest there. And I think we need to actually make those come together.
We call it lab to fab, and there's a big gap sometimes. And in the US, we're trying to figure that out. Sounds like maybe here there's the same problem. You have great ideas, you never commercialize them, you lose the value. Or vice versa. If you commercialize something, then it generates more ideas. If you have that close interaction, that close partnership between academia and industry.
Johan, I noticed you nodding to what you're hearing. This is backed up by the studies you've seen.
Yes, it is. We're rightfully so talking about resilience, and that's absolutely true. But the other key aspect to consider, and that's what's behind lab to fab, as you call it so nicely, is the innovative power of these connections that take place. The value chain, as we said, of semiconductors is very long and very complex. But most of the innovations is not only done upstream. We should also keep in mind the downstream one. The connections between automotive industries that are figuring out how to do electric cars and make them self-driving, and companies that are heavily involved, like the Intels or TSMCs and others of the world, into making that. It's that connection. That's where the tension happens, and that's where the value is built. And that's precisely the reason that Europe cannot afford to have zero leading edge manufacturing capacity. We cannot let that go on. It doesn't mean that we will be self-reliant. That is a nonsense goal, I think. But it needs to be strengthened, and you need to recognize where the value is created. So that's why I was nodding.
A couple of questions. Nariman, Craig, I'm going to put this to you, is asking, what else can tech and automotive firms do other than cutting production volumes or waiting for semiconductor demands to be met? Is there another economic model? Not producing new cars and appliances, but utilizing current ones longer, more shared uses, more collaborations, and the Green Deal. Again, this is actually a couple of questions coming in at the moment referencing this Green Deal. Athanios also is asking to the panel generally, is there an alternative solution to overcome the current shortage to use devices for more years? And yes, why? Is it greener, but is it also less profitable? Quite a few of the audience are asking this question about device use and what can in practice help not just overcome the current shortage, but also looking to the kind of the green elements of it in the EU Green Deal.
Well, maybe I'll kick it off. Somebody early on said, I don't know if it was Lisa, government can act as a facilitator. And, you know, if the CHIPS Act is done correctly, if it's done quickly and correctly and connects some of these dots that we've talked about, that could be a mechanism to facilitate more investment and address the shortage in a meaningful and effective way. It's not going to be addressed short term, unfortunately, right? It has to play itself out a little bit, but there will be other shortages in the future if we don't increase our manufacturing because of the demand. The rise in demand is not going away because of the digitization of our economy and so forth. So one of the things that you can take away from our discussion, I think we all said it in different ways, is the need for stronger and better partnerships and connecting the dots and increasing the innovation between manufacturing and design and also other elements of the supply chain. That's where you get the kind of innovation that leads to more effective or lower power semiconductors that produce greener effects, right? I don't know if anybody else wants to add here.
Pick up Joe's thought about really understanding the application and what the technology can do. And if we intertwine it a little bit also, not just with the technology it can somewhere deliver, but also the sustainability aspect behind it, for instance, then you can somewhere also at least address some of these topics. Take an example, a very simple one, cloud data centers are using a lot of renewable energy. Now you can ask, okay, you can also use the energy for other applications, but these choices somewhere have to be discussed. The technology options should be somewhere put on the table and developed, and I think there we will develop things which will be innovative and also sustainable. So at the end of the day, innovation will also somewhere contribute very much to sustainability. I think it's not either or, it's really the combination of the two.
Thank you. Sigrid, let me ask you the same question. Again, another one has just come in asking what else could also be done to comply with Green Deal commitments. Does where the chips are located matter? Located, I suppose, maybe means manufactured, but also potentially used. Neriman is asking that. Perhaps you could answer with more broadly in terms of what is the relevance to the Green Deal.
I think it will become a very important aspect in competitiveness to include this in the design and manufacturing of semiconductors. Looking at energy prices, looking at the energy market, that system is also under pressure. Looking at the exponential growth of the digital sector, then almost 1 + 1 is 2. You need very energy efficient chips to make it still affordable, both in the production as well as the use. I think Europe has a very important position in that. If you look at the potential of photonics, for instance. So the Green Deal is maybe part of the CHIPS Act, can also invest in that. To invest more in the research, to invest more in the applications. There's a huge potential also in the US. I visited many photonics clusters there. So that could be something the US and Europe could work together on. So my point is, this should be one of the priorities in the future of semiconductors, make them energy efficient as possible. Yeah, please.
Yes, Lise, I was going to bring you in on this question as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, the urgency is twofold here. The shortage, and we cannot wait with leading edge semiconductors is important, but the greening is equally important. We've seen with COP26, where everyone is trying to settle a good direction for the world. I think Europe has a strong position here. And we as telcos are seeing increased pressure on, of course, what we use ourselves, but also the equipment. And here, I think circular economy is key. We need to know how to reuse, how to use our equipment. And semiconductors, we'll see if they can be replaced with new ones. I'm not a technician, but we all look into a world where the demand is growing, and as Sigrid is saying, it's a competitive advantage not only for the semiconductors, but investors are looking into, are we as companies sustainable? So that will rub off on the value chain and also, of course, of what kind of semiconductors we're buying.
I'm interested to hear, as a more technological background, what your thoughts are on this.
I'm excited we're touching on this because it goes to a lot of what we try to do in recent programs. I mean, this is going to be a shameless commercial, but we actually started a program on sustainable systems and technology, which has had quite some global, again, interest in this. And of course, we're not alone. So if you look from, say, the materials over the production processes, the packaging, how you introduce the chips in the systems that you're digitizing, but also, of course, the reuse. So we're trying to look at this from, of course, a fundamental pre-competitive point of view, but try to build the right models and integrate the views of our global partners and companies into this. So I think that is a very important one. Another one is, and that's touching on the lab to fab to used type of chain. You learn a lot when you go push technology into, for instance, ventures and new startups, because they are very directly confronted with their users, their customers, and they need to pivot. They need to come out of the box and think different in how their technology will change the world eventually. And so that dynamics that those startup and scale up companies have needs to come back into our resilient economy. I think that's an important mindset. But even more importantly, that user-centric view is now changing to a planet-centric view, right? So I mean, in case anything we do, from early research projects to implementation of new technologies, there's going to be this reflex, fortunately, of a planet-centric innovation. And I think that's where the bottom line, our technology, our new SSTS program started, but also it resonates throughout, and this will be an important wave to serve, if I can paraphrase this way. So I think that's a very important element. And along that, I think industry alliances and again startups, the new way of doing things, the new way of approaching use cases, and the way we go about our lives and our professional demeanor is going to be extremely important. And I think we need moonshots for that, right? I mean, that's a word that has not dropped yet, but we need to really put a stake in the ground far enough so that we open our eyes and say, okay, if that's the type of future we are going to be needing, we need to really rethink some fundamentals of this. And I'm totally convinced that our semiconductor technology can help do that. But first thing we need to do is to look at our own shop and see that we can do the best we can in that direction.
Absolutely, and well done for being the first one to use the word moonshot in this debate. We're into our last sort of 15 minutes rounding up, and there's a new question, and indeed thank you to our audience, both online and here, for submitting all these questions. As we say, there's been a big interest in this sustainability green element. But I have a question here from Frank, who's asking, is there an additional hidden bottleneck, brackets IP, and how could this issue be managed? I'm going to put this, Guido, to you and Johan. Is there another bottleneck that we haven't been talking about yet today?
I think IP is an important element, especially in this industry, it's there are a lot of, let's say, is built also a lot of on kind of how we handle IP, and there must be I think good systems in place to somewhere ensure that IP is treated in the way that people who generate IP can also benefit from it, but also that you can somewhere share it in a good way, in a fair way, in an open economy. So I think it's a valuable, it's an important topic to create a system and also a governance that allows IP development and also IP sharing on a global basis.
Greg, do you think that Europe is moving in the right direction on this? I mean, IP is a global matter, but it also falls under the auspices of the big Berlaymont building next door to us.
Well, maybe I could redirect the question to Jo and listen to, because IMEC has been extremely successful, and maybe he could say something about their IP model.
Yo, can you indeed
Correct.
say
Thanks for the
something about your
accolades. Thanks for the accolades, but I think we actually came out to discover that together, right? I mean, the way to treat this and pre-competitive research, and I'm stepping away from the real university research. We have like 700 PhD students working in our programs, so we understand what it means to work together with these with the universities. But IP becomes, of course, more sensitive if you come to the end product, and I think we have indeed learned throughout partnerships that. You can actually share quite a bit of IP, and if I can refer to the ITRS, which used to be, in the happy scaling period, just pointing to where the red bricks were and try to tackle those, then we knew pre-competitive what it meant, right? Of course, consolidation and the ecosystem did change over the past decade or plus, but still there is this pre-competitive need. And IP is only a problem if you can't access it, right? I mean, and you need to make sure that there's a way, and that's what we structure in our programs, is that the partners that need to go out and make a difference in the market, they can get access to the IP. Sitting on it does never help. Of course, there are areas which are very sensitive, and we need to protect competitiveness. In a sense, we need to make sure that companies that come work with us don't get frustrated in that process. They need to make sure that they have a differentiating element. But all of them, from the startups to the largest companies, they have their own R&D behind what they do in the shared model, and they can always differentiate based on their own insights and maybe their business-to-business collaborations they have themselves. So it's a bit of a clumsy answer, Greg. I'm sorry. Thanks for referring the question to me, but I think it's very important that we continue, and that is a dynamic landscape. We continue to understand what IP is needed to make an impact and how we can share it or make sure it is secured. But it's something that really is in the interplay of the ecosystem, and it can be done. I think that's what we indeed have shown over the past decades.
Well, thank you for tackling that. I think it was an audience question, but it's important to acknowledge that it is part of the overall ecosystem. Sigrid, I have a question from Dimitri asking, how profitable is it today for international investors to engage in the EU semiconductors field? I suppose this comes down to questions of investment. Perhaps you can talk about that more broadly.
I'm also interested in the opinion of the other panel members. I think it's very profitable. Starting as what I said earlier, if we look at our mature semiconductor industry, who have invested in certain niches like automotive and cybersecurity over the last couple of years, decades. That's a very competitive sector. There's a lot of competition going on, but they've always managed to stay ahead and develop their business globally. They're also each other's competitors. But I think from that perspective, Europe is definitely worthwhile. If I look at leading edge, of course, I mentioned the Dutch company before, who are developing the next generation after EUV, which will be world leading probably again if they all succeed, and I have all confidence in that. So there are many building blocks within the European ecosystem that have a lot of meaning and potential, so globally. So I would definitely invest. If I look at important investment companies in the world, they also have a big share in these companies, and I think it can only become more. Looking at the CHIPS Act, we talked about this before. Now the US and the EU both have a CHIPS Act, and at the same time they both are looking into how can we make this into a very strong instrument. Attracting investment should be part of that. We've been talking about public-private, also public-private and planet. I would add the citizen to that. The more we, via the CHIPS Act, attract these investments, the more we think of a new concept, how to make it sustainable, how to make it energy efficient, and also to make sure that the applications are meaningful to our citizens. It's a topic we didn't touch upon, but citizens want to be involved. In Europe, we talk about a human-centered approach on tech, and this is a moment to do that right.
Thank you very much, Sigrid. You've really got that point, I think, clearly across. Johan, here, the study is entitled Europe's Urgent Need to Invest in a Leading Semiconductor Ecosystem. Invest has many meanings, but I guess our audience member is asking, what about the profitability? What about the ROI?
Yes, absolutely. Well, go ahead.
Sigrid already mentioned it, and also I think also Jo gave a topic there. First of all, I think the whole industry, now I'm talking about mature, advanced, and so on, are very attractive. Just compare a few valuations, so market valuations of, let's say, more historic kind of industries towards the semiconductor industry, and take European players, take US players, take Asian players. They're quite highly valued. Okay, currently the market is very favorable. Nevertheless, I think stock markets are very much valuing semiconductor, and that's an indication for growth and profitability in the long term. So I think and you can do the same thing also for European companies. I think another element which maybe would be important, and I don't want to somewhere now twist there the discussion, is what Jo mentioned is about the startups and creating kind of new companies. If you look back 30 years in the US, large companies, large players in the industry today, they were startups at the time. And we see that in Europe currently now coming up with digital companies. Just one example, in Germany, there are a few digital companies now in the stock market index. We have several unicorns. It would be great if in semiconductor we would also develop this from a startup or from a company into a, big kind of listed company. I know this is more kind of a vision. It takes a long time. There's a long perspective, but nevertheless, it would be great to have maybe new companies there. And we also said in our study is these can be future customers for some other people in the ecosystems, new customers.
Well, you've done a great job of setting up for my last question, which is, I started by asking about what was the doomsday scenario. I want then just a final, a quick 1 minute. What is the potential? What is your optimism? Johan, I'm going to do this in rotation. Johan, what's your optimism?
You want me to be optimistic?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I think everything is... I think actually the comment was made, I believe it was Sigrid, that the study was timely. And I think it is timely. It's certainly coming out, I'm hopeful now, of the pandemic. Can I say that, coming out? I'm not sure. But anyway, certainly after we see what has happened, the enormous importance of digital, in the broader sense of the word, in every part of life, is, I think, becoming clear to absolutely everyone. So the urgency, I think, is higher than ever. It does not come cheap. This requires a massive effort. Let's be realistic too, and a lot of investments by both private and government, by the way, both. But I believe that the urgency is now higher than ever, and that's the prime reason that I'm optimistic.
Lise.
Yeah, from the telco point of view, I think we have a lot of opportunities if we bring the semiconductors back to Europe, or the leading edge semiconductors. We have the potential of course, a strong digital leadership, but we have the skills that can actually be reinforced and multiplied. And I also think we have a very tech-savvy, both citizen pool and also governmental pool in Europe. So that will be even enhanced and get stronger for our citizens. And last but not least, I think if we bring this to Europe and have it as a European center of innovation, we will have a more human-centric approach, like Sigrid is talking about. And I think this is the core of our digital future, that we have this European approach where we bring the human in the center and see technology from that angle.
Craig.
From an Intel point of view, right? We've announced the desire to invest $20 billion in Europe, and with a potential to go up to $100 billion. And we have partnerships with IMEC and Fraunhofer and CA Leti, and we have a number of suppliers here in the ecosystem. And just we do feel that people are feeling a sense of urgency to act and to develop these partnerships, and to do it from R&D, pre-competitive R&D, all the way up to applications, as Jo talked about. So we're very optimistic. I think we're going to see more innovation next decade than we've seen in the last 30 or 50 years.
Sigrid, your optimistic outlook as a wrap-up.
Yeah, I'll do my best to think of a nightmare scenario next time. As I mentioned, this is the momentum to act and to do it right. I think we mentioned many elements that should be taken into account. It's a complex decision, but it is a decision that should be made. Are we going to invest in leading edge, and how are we going to do that? But also the question why. What do we want to accomplish? Not only market value, not only a flourishing economy, not only better partnerships, but definitely also a better planet and a human-centered approach, so that there will stay trust in technology and support for these tremendous opportunities that are there for the next decades, I think.
And finally, Jo, the last word falls to you to define the utopia.
Oh my goodness, last word on utopia in one sentence. So I'm optimistic for three reasons, basically. First of all, I think we understand the urgency, and we see it supported by a broad application view and a planet-centric view, as we talked about. That's one. Second, I see, as Greg said, the industry leaders really eager to take the opportunity, to take the momentum, and understanding where they can play. I see it. We see it in all our partners. We see it in Europe specifically as well. And we see it also with our colleagues in the R&D and pilot business, like Fraunhofer was mentioned, CALIT was mentioned, and us. We're coming really closely together to take that opportunity. And then thirdly, I see the political will, right? I'm optimistic about that. I mean, we've had waves before with Nelly Cruz, as mentioned by Sigrid earlier, and we see it now. There is understanding that something needs to happen. There's transatlantic political discussions on that, as Greg mentioned. And we see are really optimistic there that we can get our CHIPS Act together, so to speak. So with that, I hope it's not utopia. I think it's our future.
Thank you very much indeed, Jo, for those thoughts. Thank you for all our panelists, and to the audience, both here in the Euractiv offices and online, for your great questions, for helping to drive this conversation. You can see this report. It is hot off the presses today. There are lots of links online. You'll find it no problem if you go to the various websites. And of course, with that, thank you very much to Intel for organising today's event. Follow them online as well to find out more about the semiconductor industry and how it's going to build a better future for all of us. And of course, do follow us on Euractiv, as we have many other events coming up, partially in person and partially broadcast to the wider world. So with that, have a great day, and thanks for your thoughts.